The last song that we sang, I kept getting that one stuck in my head last year when we would sing it, just throughout the day. Joy, 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 joy. Going on, but what a nice thing to keep being reminded of and to get stuck in your head. I usually get annoying songs stuck in my head, and this one's not. It's a great thing, and how appropriate because we lit the joy candle today. And as I was planning for Advent Sunday on joy, kept looking up, as a starting place, I was looking up Bible verses on joy. There are a lot of them, and a lot of them speak to us having joy during hard times, during trials, and even when things aren't going well. And that's rather counterintuitive. But for the believer, the Bible calls us to have joy always, rejoice always, have joy all the time. And that's a different concept than just pretending to be happy all the time. And then I was looking for, seeing that, I was looking for examples of it. And perhaps the most striking example that I found was in Acts chapter 15, which was a story about Paul and Silas. Now, we have joy this Christmas season, but we have to acknowledge too that while we come together and celebrate it, I've known an awful lot of people that some Christmases are hard for them, particularly if they've lost a loved one that they normally spend it with. But yet, even in the hardest of circumstances, we can have joy. Christ brings joy, offers us joy this holiday season. The word joy is defined in the dictionary, the Webster Dictionary, as the emotion evoked by well-being, success, or good fortune, or by the prospect of possessing what one desires. The expression or exhibition of such emotion, or a state of happiness. But according to the Bible, it doesn't depend on our immediate circumstances or our state, the state that we're in, or where we find ourselves. In the last year and a half, I think most of you know, I had a few hospital stays regarding cardiac problems, and one thing that became apparent that the nurses told me is that a lot of them just said, "Oh, thank you for being nice to us. We really, really appreciate it." Most people, I said, "What do you mean most people aren't?" Well, people here usually aren't feeling good and having a very good time, so, 3/4 of people just are nasty and verbally abusive, and it's just nice every once in a while to get a patient that's, civil. I said, oh my gosh, I didn't realize that you guys had to deal with that. I'm so sorry to hear that. And then I think about with, what do I say, sometimes it's just your outlook. One meal, I was thinking about, well, doesn't feel good to be here, but at least the food's good. And I'm there thinking like, man, this dinner is just better than what I expected. You hear about hospital food from people, and I was just thinking like, man, this pot roast is good today. They nailed it on this one. And then as I'm finishing it up, I hear a guy down the hall screaming, "I don't eat garbage. Quit feeding me this garbage." And then for like the next 10 minutes, I just kept hearing it yelling. It sounded like an older man's voice. They're feeding me garbage. Help! being like, man, so much of the time it's just about perspective. I guess he has much different tastes than I do. Or in that context, it stuck with me, and it was probably over a year ago. Um, I don't I don't mean to put anybody on the spot or embarrass them, but John Papa Nicholas was over in the nursing home, and I'm walking in to go visit him, and before I even get in, I hear him telling the nurse, like, you know what? Things aren't going so well, but even if even if I pass away, I have Jesus and I'm going to be with him, and that makes me happy and gives me joy. And thinking like, man, and he doesn't even know his pastor's right there. It was just him and her, but even when things aren't going our way, that's the sort of attitude we're supposed to have. And it's not always easy to do. And none of us get it right all the time. I read one that said, if you can start the day without caffeine, well, that might eliminate a lot of us. If you can always be cheerful, ignoring aches and pains, if you can resist complaining and boring people with your troubles, if you can eat the same food every day and be grateful for it, if you can understand when your loved ones are too busy to give you any time, if you can take criticism without resentment, if you can resist treating a rich friend better than a poor friend, if you can face the world without lies and deceit, if you can overlook it when those you love take it out on you when, though no fault of your own, something goes wrong, if you can conquer tension without medical help, if you can say honestly that deep in your heart you have no prejudice against creed, color, religion, or politics, then, my friend, you are probably the family dog. Yeah, that's showing that for a human, this is hard to do and hard to pull off. Let's look at Acts chapter 16, starting at verse 12. This is an account of Paul and Silas on their missionary journey. It's interesting that where he was trying to go, God's Spirit prevented him from going and redirected him. And it doesn't say how, and it doesn't tell us why, either than God had a preordained appointment for them somewhere else. And right there, we can learn a lot from that. We can easily lose our joy when our plans get rerouted. Our day doesn't go exactly how we think it's going to go. I read a quote saying that joy comes when we let go of the life we wanted and expected and start embracing the life that is. That's a good lesson there. So Paul and Silas get rerouted to Philippi. It says from there we reached Philippi, a major city of that district of Macedonia and a Roman colony, and we stayed there for several days. Philippi was named after Alexander's the Great father, Philip. So I named the city of Philippi, which had become a major city in Macedonia. It had recently been granted the status of a Roman colony, and so it was said that a lot of military veterans would retire there. And it says we stayed there several days. On the Sabbath, we went a little ways outside the city to a riverbank where we thought people would be meeting for prayer. And we sat down to speak with some of the women who had gathered there. So it says, where we thought people would be meeting for prayer, other versions say it was a place of prayer. And this is different because on Paul's missionary journeys, usually he comes into a city, goes and finds the nearest synagogue of Jews, and is usually invited to speak as he's a visiting rabbi. And he would go through messianic prophecies about Jesus being the promised Messiah. And so here it's different. Apparently, it doesn't say, but apparently he doesn't find a synagogue, but he finds where people would go to pray over by the riverbank. One interesting piece of trivia is that in order to have a synagogue would be a gathering that required 13 adult males to have a synagogue. So if you only had 12 adult males, or even if you had 50 women, it didn't meet their criteria for being a synagogue. So but they still would function like a synagogue and have a religious meeting every week on the Sabbath. But with it being short of the number to constitute them, they called them places of prayer. You might think of it as like a informal Bible study if there was no church to be had. So he doesn't find a synagogue, but he finds a place of prayer, and he goes there to do the same thing that he normally would do in a synagogue, tell people about Jesus. It says, we sat down and spoke with some women who had gathered there. One of them was Lydia from Thyatira, a merchant of expensive purple cloth. All purple cloth then was expensive. Purple dye was hard to come by. They had to go through a process of extracting it from certain kind of shellfish. And so it was rare and it was expensive. Typically worn by rich people and royalty. So now it's easier to get, and our purple garment might not cost more than the other colors of garment. So thank you, Kathy, for dressing for the sermon this morning. See, one wore purple. So a merchant, Lydia, and a merchant of expensive purple cloth who worshipped God. As she listened to us, the Lord opened her heart, and she accepted what Paul was saying. She and her household were baptized, and she asked us to be her guests. So great, now they have a place to stay. If you agree that I am a true believer in the Lord, she said, come and stay at my home. She urged us until we agreed. One day while we were going down to the place of prayer, that sounds nice, they're having prayer out by the river. One day as we were going down to the place of prayer, we met a slave girl who had a spirit that enabled her to tell the future. So, one thing that's missed in almost every English translation of the Bible, in the Greek text in which it was originally penned, it literally says, we met a slave girl who had a spirit of Python. And so, I think most of us read it and we're saying, ooh, a spirit of Python, what is that? So, a spirit of Python was a symbol of the Delphic oracle of representing the god Apollo. So you've probably all heard of the Greek god Apollo. So when there were temples set up to Apollo, there were priestesses that would prophesy and tell people the future. So they were sort of functioned like psychics or palm readers, and they were said to be possessed or guided by the Python spirit. And so even kings, before they would go to battle, would go and ask these oracles and these priestesses what the outcome was going to be. And people would go to them for many reasons. Maybe reasons like people still go to psychic shops or the fortune teller at the fair, or to have their palms read. It says she earned a lot of money for her masters by telling fortunes. Part of my mind works in a business sort of way. I drive by fortune telling places sometimes, and I think that, like, sometimes they're, in a nice building. I think, man, there has to be a lot of people stopping here for them to be able to stay in business, to pay for a lease of this building and insurance, water, garbage, sewage, electricity. They've got to be paying for all that before they could even turn a profit. So I wonder how much they're charging, and then how many clients have to come in every day and every week for them to just be able to stay in business and make a living at it. But here it's saying that she earned a lot of money for her masters by telling fortunes. So apparently it was lucrative back then, as it might be now. I mean, the Bible tells us to stay away from that. Lord comes down hard on people that do those things. As you remember, the first king of Israel, Saul, the last straw when God had it with him is when he went to see the fortune teller, the witch of Endor, and that story. So as she followed Paul and the rest of us, shouting, "These men are servants of the Most High God, and they come to tell you how to be saved." She was making a fortune by fortune telling. And so it seemed that she was well known in town. She's following Paul and the rest of us, shouting. If you read through the book of Acts or study it, one thing to pay attention: Luke's the author of it, and sometimes he's in the story, and most of the time, though, he's not. But it goes from them to us sometimes, and when it goes to us, that infers that he was there as an eyewitness to them. So he followed Paul and the rest of us as one of Paul's missionary companions at different times throughout the story of Acts. These men are servants of the Most High God, and they have come to tell you how to be saved. Well, very interesting, coming from a pagan, idolatrous religion of the temple of Apollo and having a python spirit. You wonder some of the time that if there's anything to it. Somebody I know told me that this was like years ago when I was in college, that they applied for the job and that they were going to be a phone psychic. And I said, how are you going to be a phone psychic? You don't have any of those powers. You're not. Yeah, but they just teach you how to do it, to tell people general things that they want to hear, and there's good money in it. And he didn't get the job, but they were training people with what to say in order to keep people on the phone, as they would bill you per minute. But then here it says that she had a spirit of python. Christians would understand that to be a demon either speaking through her or telling her what to say, that there was something to it and there was something evil about it. But she's following them around saying, "These men are servants of the Most High God. They have come to tell you how to be saved." Might be good publicity for telling people about Jesus. That's verse 18. This went on day after day until Paul got so exasperated that he turned and said to the demon within her, I command you in the name of Jesus Christ to come out of her. And instantly it left her. Her master's hope of wealth had now been shattered. So they grabbed Paul and Silas and dragged them before the authorities in the marketplace. The whole city was in an uproar because of these Jews, they shouted at the city officials. They're teaching customs that are illegal for us Romans to practice. You hear about early Christian persecutions by the Romans. Some of it came from a place of saying that, hey, these Christians are telling people that it is unacceptable to worship the Roman gods. And that's just simply unpatriotic. And that's going to undermine the emperor and the whole empire. And so that was an argument and a reason that one of the reasons that they were persecuted. And so here it's saying that they're teaching us customs that are illegal for us Romans to practice. Now, some of the Roman rulers and colonies were suspicious of foreign religions and foreign gods, which the Jewish God would have been a foreign god to them. Certainly they were teaching people to turn away from idols. And now they have chased away the spirit of Python and the money opportunities that go with it. We see elsewhere in Acts, Paul was run out of town because he was putting the idol makers out of business. You know, the people that were carving idols and making them out of metal. So many people turned to Jesus that they stopped buying idols and their livelihood was gone. Money talks here. So it says, a mob quickly formed against Paul and Silas. The city officials ordered them stripped and beaten with rods. And it was known the enforcers or the police force would carry around rods. It was a symbol of their authority, and they'd beat people with it. You ever been hit with a stick or a bat? Yeah, it hurts. I remember another kid whacked me upside the head with a plastic bat when I was a little kid. That, I mean, even the plastic bat that, you know, the kind you hit wiffle balls with, even that hurt pretty good. Did knock me down. So the city officials ordered them stripped and beaten with wooden rods. Verse 23, they were severely beaten. And then what? And then taken to the hospital? No, they were severely beaten and then they were thrown into prison. We read this. I mean, it's not fair. They were doing God's work. They had just cast out a demon here. The jailer was ordered to make sure they didn't escape, so the jailer put them into the inner dungeon and clamped their feet with stocks. So, being in a riot situation, a mob quickly forming around you, and I've watched enough Western movie. Angry mobs are scary. I mean, you don't even usually want to be around them as a spectator. I mean, you hear if there's riots going on in Oakland, you want to get as far away from that as you can, typically. But here, they were beaten by city officials, thrown in prison. The jailer put them into the inner dungeon. That just doesn't sound nice. It's like being put in the hole. And clamped their feet into stocks. Having your feet clamped into the stocks, I imagine that would make it hard to sleep. and you're probably already in pain from having been beaten with wooden rods. But then what they do is why I chose this passage today for joy. Around midnight, Paul and Silas were praying and singing hymns to God. We've all probably heard this story before, but in a way it seems ridiculous when you read it. I mean, this is like the kind of thing you see in a Monty Python movie. That they're beaten, they're put in the stocks, and then they're singing together, totally minimizing what had happened to them. I mean, I'm thinking about the Monty Python and the Holy Grail, where the scene with the Black Knight that says, "None shall pass" to the knights that are coming with them, and they get into a sword fight, and the Black Knight gets his arm cut off, and he's bleeding everywhere, and he's saying like, "Hey, you still can't pass. It's just a scratch." His other arm gets cut off. Then no, just a flesh wound, and then they continue to fight. His leg gets cut off, and he's hopping after them, ramming them with no arms, and just happy. Yeah, this is what's going on there. They've been beaten with rods, thrown in prison, ordered to make sure that they don't escape, put in the inner dungeon, and then clamped their feet in stocks. Around midnight, Paul and Silas were praying and singing hymns to God, and the other prisoners were listening. That's remarkable right there. But Paul's letter to the Philippians 4 verse 4 says, "Rejoice in the Lord always. Again I say rejoice." And he writes that from a different imprisonment that he had. I mean, from our perspective, he's done nothing wrong. But he says, rejoice. Rejoice in the Lord always. Again I say rejoice. He writes this from prison in one place, and then in another place, he's living it. They're there praying and singing hymns, and the other prisoners were listening. I don't know what the other prisoners thought of it. They see them dragged in there, bleeding, put in stocks, put in the inner dungeon. I mean, are any of the other prisoners trying to sleep? They're yelling, "Shut up! I'm trying to sleep." Or are they singing along with them? Is the joy contagious, maybe? Suddenly there was a massive earthquake, and the prison was shaken to its foundations. All the doors immediately flew open, and the chains of every prisoner fell off. The jailer woke up to see the prison doors wide open. He assumed the prisoners had escaped, so he drew his sword to kill himself. But Paul shouted to him, "Stop, don't kill yourselves. We are all here." So we know Roman officers that were charged to guard prisoners, if they lose their prisoner, they'd be executed and made an example of. He was thinking here, a lot of the prisoners are gone. They all got out. I'm going to be executed. And they might do something like crucify them to make an example of them. So it says he drew his sword to kill himself. And it may have been a matter of honor as well. It's not an uncommon thing. Samurai culture, samurais would, if they would lose their honor, they would run themselves through with a sword and disembowel themselves for a way to have an honorable death. So rather gruesome there. But Paul shouted to him, "Stop, don't kill yourself. We are all here." The jailer called for the lights and ran to the dungeon and fell down trembling before Paul and Silas. Then he brought them out and asked, "Sirs, What must I do to be saved? They replied, believe in the Lord Jesus, and you will be saved, along with everyone in your household. And they shared the word of the Lord with them and all who lived in his household. But even at that hour of the night, the jailer cared for them and washed their wounds. Then he and everyone in his household were immediately baptized. He brought them into his house and set a meal before him, and he and his entire household rejoiced because they all believed in God. So rejoice means that they had joy. Now, how did Paul keep all the other prisoners there if all the doors were open and all the chains fell off? Well, it seemed that their joy was contagious, and it seemed like a revival was happening there in the most unlikely of place. And even the guard gets saved, and everybody in his household. And one thing we see in the book of Acts, when people get saved, they're usually baptized within a few hours. That's one thing. And then when you read church history, usually then it became the opposite a generation or two later that, then a lot of the churches wanted people to be saved for a year and to come to classes several times a week before they would baptize them. But the biblical model is it happened fast. Now, did they understand everything about the Bible? Did they know their theology? No, but they put their faith in Jesus and they were saved just like that, because it's not about what we do. The Bible tells us again and again that we're saved by faith. It's the gift of God, not by our own works, lest anybody should boast. Ephesians 2, 8, and 9 is very clear on that. The next morning, the city officials sent the police to tell the jailer, let those men go. So the jailer told Paul, the city officials have said that you and Silas are free to leave. Go in peace. But Paul replied, they have publicly beaten us without a trial and put us in prison. And we are Roman citizens. Now they want us to leave secretly? Certainly not. Let them come themselves to release us. This seems to be another thing that reminds me of Monty Python. Like, no, I'm not going to leave the jail. I'm cozy here. They can come get us out of themselves. There was a messed up thing, though, in the Roman world. It's like, if somebody was a non-citizen, you could beat them and abuse them and kind of do whatever you wanted to them, but not so for a citizen. Citizens had rights. Everybody else didn't. And that's how it works. Now, Paul was a citizen, so he was saying, like, no, they beat us unlawfully, so I don't think we're quite sure how lawsuits worked then. If that was a threat, like, oh no, we messed up here. Perhaps different than how we work of it being a lawsuit. They might have themselves been charged criminally and had consequences for that. It says, when the police reported this, the city officials were alarmed to learn that Paul and Silas were Roman citizens. So they came to the jail, apologized to them, and then they brought them out and begged them to leave the city. When Paul and Silas left the prison, they returned home to the home of Lydia. There they met with believers and encouraged them once more, and then they left town. Well, we see a real example here of joy in every circumstances. James, in the book of James, opens up, James, a servant of God and of the Lord Jesus Christ, to the 12 tribes scattered among the nations, greetings. So verse 1 of James is just an opening greeting, who it's from, who it's to. But the first thing he says, consider it pure joy, my brothers and sisters, whenever you face trials of many kinds. Wait, consider it joy or have joy when you face trials? What? How? Pure joy, not grudging joy, pure joy when you face trials of many kinds, because you know that the testing of your faith produces perseverance. Let perseverance finish its work in you, so that you may be mature and complete, not lacking anything. What we're learning here is that joy does not need to depend on your circumstances. If you're having a bad day, you can still have joy. If you're tired, hurting, sore, having medical problems, having financial problems, having problems at work, you could still have joy. Now there are joy suckers all around us, joy vampires, people that try to take your joy, but it's yours to give or keep. It's all yours. As Paul wrote, rejoice in the Lord always. Again, I say rejoice. Here we see he wasn't having a good day, it seems, being beaten with rods, thrown in the dungeon, put in stocks, yet they sang. And yet he seems that he saw it as a good day because, hey, people got saved. Now, he tells us further in 2 Corinthians chapter 6, 3 through 10, some of what he's been through. We put no stumbling block in anybody's path, so our ministry will not be discredited. Rather, as servants of God, we commend ourselves in every way, in great endurance, in troubles, in hardships, and in distresses, in beatings, imprisonments, and riots, in hard work, in sleepless nights, and in hunger, in purity, understanding, patience, and kindness, in the Holy Spirit, and in sincere love, in truthful speech, and in the power of God, with weapons of righteousness in the right hand and the left, through glory and dishonor, bad report or good report, genuine, yet regarded as impostors, known, yet regarded as unknown, dying, and yet we live on, beaten, and yet not killed, sorrowful, yet always rejoicing. Always rejoicing. That jumps out right here, this passage. He's talking about having troubles and hardships, beatings, imprisonments, riots, sleepless nights, hunger. Elsewhere he wrote that he'd been shipwrecked 3 times and floated in the open ocean for days on end, probably clinging to a piece of the ship, wondering if he's going to live or die. Here it says, dying, and yet we live on, having several near-death experiences, beaten, and yet not killed. Yeah, remember when he got bit by a viper on the island, and yet nothing happened to him? Sorrowful, yet always rejoicing. Poor, yet making many rich. He's saying even though he's poor, he's making other people rich spiritually. Having nothing, yet possessing everything. This means that, well, he didn't have material things. He possessed everything because he had Jesus in his heart. He had God, and he was doing his work, and that made him happy. One thing clicked for me a long time ago when some preacher pointed out that I was listening to. Think about the whole of the Bible, all of the major characters in the Bible. None of them were having a good time all the time. Every one of them that we even know very much about had some hardship and was going through some hard thing. Yet, a lot of them had joy. One, happiness is a choice, whether you're going to keep it or let other people take it from you, let your circumstances take it from you. But it's something we can have even on bad days, even in hard seasons of our lives. Luke 2, verse 10, this is the angels appearing to the shepherds. And the angel said unto them, Fear not, and behold, I bring you good tidings of great joy. We all know those words. I bring you good tidings, it's good news, of great joy, which will be to all people. For unto you this day in the city of David a Savior, which is Christ the Lord. That's what we celebrate this Advent, these things, but joy. Joy is so central to the Christian faith. When we lose it, we all lose it at times, we need to put our eyes back on Jesus, who came with good news of us to bring great joy, not just a little bit of joy, great joy to all people. So we're reminded this morning of the attitudes we're supposed to have. Now, it seems that some Christians miss this and not everybody has joy, but it's central to our faith, and we're supposed to be a people of joy. Joy, love, peace, and hope, all revolving around the Christ candle. Those things revolve around and are anchored to Jesus and having Jesus in our lives. So now we're going to have one more song, and then we'll have announcements and the benediction. But as we do that, if the message spoke to you and you'd like prayer, if you'd like to invite Jesus into your life or like prayer for anything, I'll be happy to pray with you up front during the last song if you'd like to come forward.